All right, welcome everybody. This is Don Weber, and welcome to the SANS at Mike night talk. And this is my first one, so just kind of getting used to this. This isn't my first SANS at night talk, but it's definitely the first one that's online under these current conditions. And so I'm really excited to get this out there. I'm really excited to see a lot of you. I'm kind of scrolling through the attendees list. It looks like we have around 100 people, maybe just under that because of some dupes on there, but definitely the largest crowd that I've had at a SANS at Night talk. So I'm very excited about this, and we are going to have a great time. One of the things that I like to say for these things is that this is an at night talk. The premise I try to put on this is this, this isn't a conference talk. This is an evening class, or not, excuse me, not a class, but an evening talk. I typically am doing this at the conferences while I'm teaching, and I like to have this as a relaxed environment, meaning that I like people asking questions. I like a little bit of banter. We can't unmute the mics, unfortunately, because that would just be too much of a distraction. But what we do have the questions windows. We do have the chat windows. I have them up on the right side of my screen, so I can see those as they're going through. If I can get to a question, I'll definitely look over there, try to answer it. If they're scrolling too fast, I might have to pause at certain points during the conversation and kind of field some of the questions. But please feel free to make comments, to add value. Ultimately, one of the things that I like to bring out in all of these conversations is that we are stronger as a community, as a team, pulling things together, pulling our ideas, pulling our experiences together, and to talk about these things because we have to, as you'll experience in just a minute, we have to come together as a team to address security within all of our business environments, and most especially in our OT environments. Okay. All right. So you're here to have a few things to cover. One of the, obviously this is a SANS talk, so we're going to want you to do evals. We are sending out a link. Looks like Carol has already put the link into the chat. So when you have a minute, at the end of the presentation, or as we're going through, take a few minutes, fill out the evaluation, put on anything that is associated with me and the content. That's extremely helpful for me. I do review every single one of the evaluations so that I can make it better going forward. But also feel free to put down comments about the venue. Certainly we're not in a hotel or anything like that. Don't need to call out, the cleanliness of your room, but you can certainly talk about, the GoToMeeting, how your experience is with the GoToWebinar, whether I'm coming through clearly or not, whether the video is helpful, whether it's not. That's extremely helpful for me. So please fill out the evaluations and let us know what your thoughts are. Okay, so we're here to talk about pen testing ICS and other highly restricted environments. And what I'm going to gear this towards is I'm gearing this towards the information security professionals that are coming into this industry, and they need to understand certain terms and concepts. Now, if you're from an OT environment and you understand the OT side and you understand industrial control systems and processes, you're still going to get value from this, okay? Because you're going to understand some of the things that I need to call out to information security professionals that are coming into this field, things that I need them to understand, and you can take away from that. You can have that knowledge and present that to the people that are coming into your environment. Hey, these are some of the things that you need to be concerned about. You need to understand as you're coming in here to help the team address some of these things. So it's mainly geared towards that information security professional coming in, but certainly I'm hoping all of us can get value out of it, okay? And now I need to, all right, excellent. So who am I? I'm Don Weber. I run Cutaway Security. It's my own personal company. And what I do is I do security assessments for all types of environments, for all types of businesses. But most particularly, I've been focusing in the last year, I've been focusing on industrial control system environments and helping organizations understand how they can protect and improve the security around their processes. I've got a long background, security management, penetration testing, and security research. One of the things that really kind of drew me into this is I got to work at a company that did a lot of research for the utilities, and I got to pull apart smart meters. I got to actually take apart the hardware, learn how to extract the information from it, the information at storage and information as it was flowing from component to component and to the back end. And so I did radio analysis, I did network analysis, we attacked their back end infrastructure and tried to understand how attackers would go from the field devices to their internal networks. And that's what their utility that we were working for, that's what they were concerned with. And so that's what we helped them understand. I also teach the ICS 410 class, which is the class that is about the basics for industrial control systems, kind of bringing that knowledge together for information security professionals, helping them understand the OT environment, but then also helping the OT personnel understand security, information security, and all of the different components. And we're bringing people together to help them understand the vernacular, understand the terms, the concepts, and work together as a team. So I'm really excited for teaching the ICS 410 class. So a little bit about me. Now, so one of the, you've been hearing me talk a lot about terms, okay? So what's in a term? All right. Well, when we start off, we have IT versus OT. What does that actually mean? Okay, it's pretty easy to see here. You know, I've listed out a couple things. Information technology, IT is easy. Okay, information security, we might refer to that as IT security or InfoSec. All of those are really easy. But then we start getting it a little bit more confusing when we start talking about industrial control systems, ICS, operational technology, OT. You're going to hear me using these terms interchangeably. In other words, sometimes I'm going to say ICS, sometimes I'm going to say OT, and I'm starting to see in the last couple months that people are moving away from calling it industrial control systems, ICS, to operational technology. So I just wanted to kind of call that out. I'm trying to shift some of my vernacular from ICS to OT. People still understand it, but it's definitely something that could cause a difference. And that's a part of the issue when we get into these environments, and we're going to go into a little bit more in depth, is that a lot of the terms that are being used by any particular teams, you might move from one team to another, and they'll use a different term, you know, for something that's very familiar to you. And when you start talking, it kind of creates a wall, kind of builds up a wall when you start talking about using terms incorrectly, using not representing something in a way that the team is used to. And while nobody's going to be mad about it, it's going to cause confusion, and it's going to cause a little bit of strife at the very beginning until you guys can come to a common understanding. And I'm using just IT and OT as an example of that because right off the bat, ICS, OT, it's going to be used interchangeably, and some people are not going to understand it. Okay. Another concept that I believe that information security professionals need to understand when they're moving into this is the different roles that are associated with an OT environment. Okay. Most of the information security professionals that I know, and especially when I started coming into, I just kind of expected, oh, well, we're dealing with things that are connected to the network. So most of the people I'm going to be dealing with are IT administrators of some type. When I'm in a business environment, I'm either dealing with a database administrator, an Active Directory administrator, or a network administrator. People, all admins for a specific role. Well, so I kind of expected to see that when I went into the OT team. But then I got an education. I actually took the ICS 410 class, and it really helped broaden my mind around the different individuals that we're going to find out there. Now, you're still going to have those IT administrators out there. You're still going to have database administrators, your network administrators, and so forth. But there's additional roles that you're going to have that you need to understand, because that's where the information is coming from. That's where decisions are being made about the process. So if you're moving into the OT field, here are some key roles that you need to understand outside of leadership. So we have our process engineers, which typically fully understand all of the process and the requirements that were necessary to build that process. You're typically going to start with those people because they're ultimately responsible for a process, for the information that's flowing through there. It's all of the requirements about uptime and so forth. And the process engineers are going to be kind of the ultimate go-to person within that environment. They understand what the decisions were made and so forth. We have operational technicians that monitor and manage the process. As an example in the picture right there, I mean, you can argue that there are any number of things, but I would probably predict that that person has he's an operational technician. He's monitoring a process, he's making decisions, he's possibly going out and checking some other points within the process to ensure that everything's flowing correctly. But he is specifically assigned to operating within a certain area within the process, probably some very specific features, and he probably has a single work location that he goes to. Goes either to that desk or to a center. He might have a separate desk that is his own corporate, and then he comes out to a specific center and does his managing and monitoring of the process there. Another team member is going to be the field technicians. They're going to work on the processes and the devices that are out in the field. So they'll typically be walking around and fixing things, configuring devices, monitoring the actual devices that are out within the process. It gets kind of, depending on the organization, the operational technicians, the field technicians may be the same people, but they might be completely separate people, and that's why we call out these different roles. We're also going to have programmers, and well, programmers by name are the same as the programmers we're looking at for like web applications and other programs, but they are more specific to the devices that are within a process. So your program logic controllers and other devices, other field devices, if they're programmable, they might be the ones that are specifically going out there and writing the logic for those devices. And if you're trying to understand how a process is doing something, your process engineer will tell you the requirements, tell you what needs to happen, and then you'll have to talk to the programmers about how they solve that issue or that those requirements to make the process work. How do they program those field devices? And then obviously, as I mentioned at the very beginning, we do have administrators. You're going to have some type of IT administrator within this team. Now that might be assigned to a different team, or they might be assigned to the OT team, and that's a part of where a lot of the understanding and misunderstanding comes between the IT team and the OT team. It might be integrated, it might be a completely separate team, it might be managed, the IT administration might be managed by the corporate environment, or more than likely there's some type of integration and communication that's flowing through a particular person or a team to help administer your devices, your network, and your master servers and so forth within your processes. So when we're going in to evaluate these environments, the OT environments, it's going to be slightly different. We're going to have more roles within our OT environments. Also, I need to level set a little bit about what a process is. So we've been talking a little bit about a process, and you know what? Let's go ahead and try the raise your hand. So I probably should have done this at the beginning, but there's no time like a present. So if you work in an OT environment, if you can raise your hand, try to find it, and we can see how many people we have here that actually work in OT and how many are base or purely IT. So we'll give that a few minutes. I'm trying to see a total here. Does it give me a total? So I don't see a total, but I see about a third, I think. So we have about a third, okay? All right, so for the 2/3 that aren't IT, about a quarter to a third, we need to kind of help you understand. Thank you everybody for raising your hand, by the way. We need to kind of help you understand what processes are, okay? And I got this the other day. I had an interview. Hopefully it'll be coming out soon. It's by a gentleman who's starting out a YouTube channel, and he wanted to do an interview and talk to some people about it. And like right off the bat, we identified that he didn't know what SCADA was. He actually he referred to everything as SCADA, including the devices, and it wasn't necessarily, he didn't know what he didn't know. And so that's what we're here to kind of help people understand. All right, so I need to level set this for the IT people. And here's just a quick breakdown. We see an image. I just got this off of Google Maps. These are the refineries, one of the refineries that I drive by. I drive by about 5 or 6 when I'm coming into the city. So each one of those little areas might be a separate process, or they could be the whole same process. Okay, but I'm not going to use the refinery example because I actually thought of, the other day I thought of a better example of it, and that's the distillery that I recently did an assessment for. Okay, so to understand processes and what we're going to talking about when we're going to do an assessment, first we want to start with a process. So what is a process? A process is a group of systems, a group of devices that perform a specific function. Okay, in the distillery, we had different processes that were involved with distilling, bottling, and distributing the alcohol. And so we'll talk about, while there's different components to distilling, we'll just use that as a whole process. So the distilling process, creating the alcohol from the grains all the way down to it's ready to put in the tanks, that would be one big process. Then when we want to take the process, or we want to take the liquid and we wanted to bottle it for distribution, then we'd go into a bottling process. So you have your distilling process, then you have your bottling process, and then finally everything gets boxed up and then shipped out. That would be a part of your distribution process. All right, each one of those is a single process. Have different devices, different configurations, potentially different management servers, but ultimately all connected to the network and potentially communicating back to some shared infrastructure. Okay, plants would be a location that has multiple processes. As you can see here, in that image, that's definitely a full plant. Lots of different processes that are in a central location. You can walk around that. It might take you from 5-10 minutes to go from one side to the other, just walking. At the distillery, we had different plants. We had one plant that had distilling, bottling, and shipping all in the same location. But they had a separate plant that was just bottling, and so they'd have to ship in the liquids, ship in the alcohol, and to this one location, this one plant, and then they had multiple lines for doing the bottling, mixing, and so forth, and then it would go out and be sent to their warehouse, and then the warehouse would do the distribution. So you can have different plants doing different things, sometimes multiple processes, and typically a plant is going to, if there's multiple processes within the plant, if they're related, they can all communicate back to each other, but they can also be completely separate. And so these will all be considerations, and we'd have to talk to people like our process engineers and our field technicians, our operators, to help understand where things are connected and where things are not. Finally, SCADA, supervisory control and data acquisition. Okay, that would be, now you can have this terminology, this term is used by many organizations differently. Usually different sectors of the OT will use the term SCADA differently. But the way I personally like to talk about SCADA is talk about regional SCADA, meaning that it's not in a plant like the refinery. It's not in a single location. You might have multiple locations throughout a state or throughout a country that are processing information. A lot of times those are coming from different organizations. A good example of that are our utilities that are coming back, and the information is being sent back to a central SCADA data center, and they're making decisions across a larger region for that. My distillery that I was working with, they did call their stuff SCADA. They had multiple plants that were creating information and then sending it back to their corporate environment. So they did leverage the term SCADA, but I wouldn't have considered them because they weren't making regional decisions. I wouldn't consider them a regional SCADA. They're more of a plant SCADA. So are there any questions so far? I'm seeing Carol talk about the CEUs. All right, so we're good to go so far. And thank you for the friendly comments up there. I do enjoy friendly comments as long as we're keeping them clean. All right, excellent. All right, so you don't know InfoSec about OT. Now we're gonna get into some of the things that really force me kind of to have these kind of conversations. All right, and what that is there's certain things that when individuals are coming from, when IT personnel are coming over, and especially information security professionals are coming over from a business environment into an OT environment, there's certain things that they latch onto. There's certain things that are not okay in our business environments that are perfectly legitimate in our own OT environments. Clear text protocols, insecure applications, vulnerable firmware. Now, some of these things are okay. Some of these things are not desired, and we would prefer to have something different. All right, and most of these things we have to accept. Okay, a good example is the clear text protocols. All right, Modbus. Yes, we in the OT community, we understand that Modbus is a clear text protocol, that it doesn't have any authentication around it, that you can do replay attacks, that you can just communicate with an endpoint device. If you're on that network, you can send commands and potentially cause modifications to the process. Okay, the community understands that. Okay, if you're coming from InfoSec into OT environment and you start saying that, hey, we need to lock all of this stuff down, it clearly tells the OT personnel that you don't know what you're talking about, that you haven't experienced this, and they're going to be very concerned about allowing you to do what you need to do, which is secure the environment. Okay, the reason why you might have some of those clear text protocols is because of timing issues, is because of the need for that's the only thing that device actually talks. It's a legacy device. It's been there for 10 years. They don't plan on replacing it for another 20. And in order to replace it, they would have to do full recertification of the whole process, which could be very, very expensive. Okay, so they understand these things. That's also why that expense, that testing and so forth, is why you're going to find these other things, these insecure applications, vulnerable firmware, brittle services. By brittle services, I mean services that if you do an Nmap scan of, it'll just fall over. Either the whole device will fall over or the application will fall over. And that's because of the processing power either on the device or because of how old that system is. It doesn't understand the type of information that you're sending to it, right? Information security professionals that are moving into the OT need to get over these things. There are a reason for it. We need to direct people. We need to identify different ways to address this. Because really the worst scenario about this, it's not the insecure devices, it's the insecure deployment of those devices. All right, and here's an example. Right now we have, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse. Somebody tell me whether or not you can see my mouse. Maybe I can use my mouse. Yes, there we go. Okay, we can see my mouse. Excellent. I had to scroll. There we go. Okay, let me move the chat down. trying to make the questions bigger. Can I do it? Nope. Okay. All right. If I miss a question, somebody let me know. All right. So we have, our worst case scenario is that, okay, this whole thing is an enterprise network. All right. We have the internet. We have the firewalls that's protecting it to us. We more than likely have a DMZ or corporate DMZ protecting some of our equipment that it's directly exposed to the internet. But we have a corporate network. Okay. But then down here, these orange devices, these are our OT environment. This is our control environment. And notice that there is no boundaries. There are no boundaries. There's definitely some network controllers in here, some core switches connected to our enterprise switches, right? This would be the worst case scenario. This is what we want to avoid. The reason why the insecure protocols, the brittle applications are so concerning is not because we have to have them in there. It's because a lot of organizations don't have those devices, those applications segregated from the rest of their network. And certainly this is the worst case scenario. More than likely, most organizations don't have this. There is some type of firewall between these, but is that tested? That's where information security professionals, the penetration testers, the security, the people that are doing the architecture reviews, this is where we can add value, and this is where we need to be focusing, okay? Awesome. Okay. But then, of course, we get to the question, it's a network. Why can't we pen test it? All right, why can't we come in and run scans? Why are they so concerned about using Nmap on the network or using a vulnerability scanner on the network? Okay, we need to address that a little bit. And the reason why is that OT has very different concerns than an IT. When we bring something down with an IT environment, they can pretty much bring it back up online. Maybe it automatically fails over. That would be the best case scenario in an IT environment. But typically they'll be down for a little while. They should be able to bring up those resources really fairly quickly. And hopefully we didn't have too much of a negative impact on either that network or that service that was being provided, okay? But that is a business concern. Within the OT environment, the OT personnel have a lot of different concerns, okay? The number one concern is safety. Safety to personnel, right? We don't want to injure somebody, we don't want to kill somebody, and that can actually happen if you bring certain things down in the wrong way. We can have a cascading effect on the process, which causes a cascade means you do one thing to one device, and then all of a sudden other things start failing down the line. They can't get control of it because of the impact on either a system or on the network, and then they have a catastrophic failure. Those catastrophic failures can lead to injuries to personnel, environmental impacts, dumping chemicals and so forth. That would be an unfortunate side effect, okay? But also, they're concerned about the process. They want the process up and running. And actually, in most organizations, I've never seen people that are so proud about what they do than in the OT environment. The OT processes are supposed to run at very specific times, sometimes 24/7. And they take it very personally when there are issues that are associated with that process. Keeping that process up and running is a sense of pride for them. And so they definitely want, while they're super concerned about safety, they're also very concerned about the process. And that's why I bring up the sustained operations. They know that they need to ensure that availability of the process and the integrity of the process needs to be maintained. And they're concerned about any information security professionals coming in, doing pen testing, and having a negative impact on their operations. And then finally, regulations is a big concern to them as well. First and foremost because of safety, but because they're also responsible for certain things associated with environmental hazards and the public impact. So regulations is a big deal. And certainly, so if you bring something down, that would be a concern of theirs. But also one of the big concerns is that any changes that we make to the environment, whether it's a change caused by our testing, and which we'll get to in a little while, or it's a change that we're asking them or requiring them to do because of the things that we found, the issues we found. That's going to, if there's regulations around that process, it's going to cost a lot of money to recertify. Okay, and so that's a huge concern, is getting that recertification after making some of the changes. So understanding our OT concerns as we're coming into these environments as information professionals, if you express to the OT teams that you understand safety is a concern, that you understand sustained operations is important to them, and definitely when you understand that regulations, making modifying a process, it takes a lot of time and planning and cost. If you let them know that you understand that, it'll go a long way to building relationships other than bringing them down. So I want to go over 3 different scenarios associated with those concerns. Okay. First of all, the first roadblock that I ran into last year was I walked into an environment, and I talked to all of the administrators. I talked to the people that I needed to talk to. I let them know that, hey, once I'm done talking to these people, I need to gather information. So I started explaining to them that we're going to do some simple discovery scans, and immediately the IT security person that I was communicating with, the lead for that team, he told me I couldn't do any scanning. He had brought me on board to do a penetration test, and he told me, hey, you can't scan anything. I was like, okay, I understand you're concerned about it. I understand we need to build up this relationship. But I still need to do some discovery. One of my deliverables is to discover things, and so I need to gather that information. And he said, no scanning whatsoever. So that's one of the first roadblocks that I came up against. I see a question, and I got to click on it. Okay, if the OT environment does not undergo a periodic pen test, what is the prevention? What is to prevent a rogue network connection going undetected and someone disrupting the environment? Okay, so let me say that one more time. I'm not sure if everybody can read it. If the OT environment does not undergo a periodic pen test, what is to prevent a rogue network connection going undetected and someone disrupting the environment? That is one of the situations that we're trying to help organizations understand when we go in. We are trying to understand if those rogue connections can be made, trying to understand if they're actually already there. And so there does need to be some discussion, some discovery around that, and some understanding for that. We'll talk about that in the methodologies, the approach that I use to help organization understand, do that threat modeling and do that risk evaluation, and also to improve their detection of those types of things. So we'll cover it a little bit more as we go down the line, John. Okay. All right, so back to my scenario here. So scenario 0, the first scenario, I wanted to do some information gathering. I was actually required to do some information gathering, and they didn't want me to do the scans. Okay. The next scenario that I ran into, and this was actually at night talk. I brought this up. I started giving I had a similar talk that I gave at one of the summits. This was at the Gas and Oil Summit last year in Houston. Okay, and I've written to help me understand the environment, to help me understand the what the configuration for their Windows systems on their master servers were. I wrote a simple PowerShell script, and all the PowerShell script does is you run it on this. You have an administrator run it on the system. Doesn't need to be an administrator, but you get better results on there. And all it does is it gathers the system information. As you can see here, this is an example of it pulling down the system information. Let me see if I can scroll in on here. It's gathering the info I really want from the system information. I want this hot fix data, because that tells me whether or not they're patching their systems, how long it's been since they've patched the systems. But the script goes even further. It gathers additional information associated with registry settings. How big are the log files configured to? Have they disabled SMB v1? Do they still have NetBIOS configured? Not necessarily trying to just trying to understand the situation and their maturity for the implementation of their Windows system within their environments. Those may or may not be vulnerabilities. They may or may not be things that can be fixed, but I wanted to at least know what their situation was. And of course, when I run this script actually writes out a file, stores out all of that information to a file in the system, so you can take it off. The administrator can take it off and grab it, and we can document that and use it for reports. But as soon as I said that this script writes information to a file, I got immediate feedback from one of the people in the talk, and he's like, "You're making a change to the system." It's like, well, I'm just writing a file to a temporary directory that's used as a temporary directory, and the administrator's pulling it right off. And the comment was, "But no, you're making changes to the system configuration." And so we had this brief exchange around this concept, but it's absolutely something that is concerning to the OT environment, to the OT management. And that's, and we'll talk about why that is in just a second, but it's definitely a situation that kind of built the brick wall up a little bit. I do see another comment, a couple other comments. I've used NetDiscover, something similar to, yes, Net Discovery is a tool that helps gather information around an environment. We'll talk about using tools that the OT team is comfortable with in just a little while, but that's definitely a tool that can be considered. Tyler's got a question. I'm sorry, this is a little bit difficult for me to read. Go to webinar as window is kind of small. I'm going to read it first and then I'll read it out to everybody. Okay, so the question is there or am I aware of a broad collection of data pertaining to how different PLCs, RTUs react to or handle scans from different tools? For example, the Siemens controller versus Schneider, can those handle HPing 3 versus Nmap, and where you can control the intensity of the scan? I'm not aware of a collection of information of anybody that has put that information out there. About 10 years ago, and maybe between 8 and 10 years ago, a part of the team at Digital Bond did a lot of testing associated with different devices, as you're describing there, PLCs, RTUs, other type of field devices, and they released that information as a report associated with vulnerabilities that were discovered on those devices and how different devices handled different types of things, such as scanning and so forth. So that information was published. It was very specific about the devices at that time. The problem is that there are so many different types of devices that are out there. There's such a broad range that it's very difficult to have that collection of information. So certainly it's just a matter of understanding, working, and communicating with the vendors for a lot of these devices. When I go in and I talk to the OT teams, a lot of times I'll actually try to find their liaison from those vendors to help communicate, talk to them about certain things. And if we're concerned about doing something, then hopefully we can, they have spare devices that maybe we can do scans on to get the information. But I don't know any broad collection, and hopefully that answer your question, Tyler. Okay, I don't see comments. Are they in the private chats? I'm not seeing, there is a chat window. I'm not I don't see any additional things in there. I'm just seeing the questions. So you're probably responding to whether or not you see them. So people are asking questions through the question thing, and so I guess that feed is just for me. Next question, you're only able to see your own questions. Are default passwords that cannot be changed also something that need to be accepted or at this time, or is there something that needs to be changed? Okay, so that kind of going back just a little bit, kind of talking about some of those brittle services, some of those applications that the OT team would be, or the IT team needs to understand within these environments. So the question, once again, are default passwords that cannot be changed also something that need to be accepted at this time? I think it needs to be a part of the discussion, as we'll talk about when we're talking about the methodology. Some of the things can't change because you'd have to change it across across the whole process, and it might just not be possible to do that. Also, you have to consider the impact that you can have on it. If you miss one of those password changes in one device, and all of a sudden everybody is concerned in trying to use that password within the process, and it fails on that one device, it might be at a critical time. And so they're going to push back on making broad scale changes like that in what we call a brownfield, meaning a brownfield means that a process that is already out there in operations and running. On greenfields, however, modifying the default passwords, greenfields would be something that's going in brand new. In other words, you identify a requirement that default passwords are not deployed within that new environment or that new process. That would be the way to do it. Okay. And then Tyler, thank you. You said that answered your question. So hopefully, Shira, that answers your questions. We'll talk about it a little bit in the methodology. Got a little off track. We talked about my scenarios. My third scenario right here. This one actually came from one of the programmers, and so we get some pushback from different individuals within the OT team. We were talking about the PLCs, we were talking about the configuration of the devices. Actually, this one was very interesting because they were actually the PLCs within the ladder logic. They were grabbing the network packet, looking at the data within the network packet, exploding that, and taking specific information from it. And we determined that there were certain aspects of their programming language that was built into the ladder logic that was injectable. Now, whether it was exploitable, we didn't know because we didn't go that far down in the testing, but we definitely could tell that they weren't doing input validation in certain places and within that program. But while we were there, even before we started doing that evaluation, we were talking to the lead programmer, and we were kind of trying to help him understand what we wanted to do. And mid-sentence, right when we started off the conversation, he just stopped us, and he literally said, "Why don't you just go away and let us do our jobs?" Okay, because he was concerned about, he felt that they had already handled this. His team wasn't really interacting with the other ones, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Wasn't really interacting with the ICS team, and he was concerned about his process, and he would rather work on the process than deal with a bunch of people that he didn't feel understood his process. Okay. All right, so how did this happen? Well, scenario 0 was the scenario where the security director told me that I couldn't do any scanning. Well, it turns out back in 2016, and I did this assessment in 2019, so 3 years before, one of the security team, I don't think under him, but the security team before had set up Nessus to scan the corporate environment. But accidentally, one of the subnets for the OT environment got on there, and it took that whole process down. So Nessus scan was run, it leaked into the OT environment accidentally, and it took them over a week to get the process back up and running because the Nessus scan took everything down. And it lasted within that, that issue remained fresh in their mind for 3 years. And us coming in to do a security assessment around that, they were still concerned about it. Okay, the second scenario was because as I mentioned before, so the second scenario was associated with me making changes to the system by running a script. They're worried about that they had to do reevaluation, recertification for any modifications on any of those systems, and writing a file was a concern to him. Okay, and so that's why I got pushed back from that one. And then obviously the final situations where I was just told to go away, let me do my job, and that's just because the IT security team and the OT team at that point had different goals, had completely different goals. They weren't coming together. We were coming in as outsiders, and we hadn't talked. Okay, and so that's how this building of the wall, as I like to say it, happened. Okay. All right. So how do we overcome this mentality? You know, obviously that's why we're here. That's why we teach the ICS 410 class to start that communications. But this is definitely the key thing that I want to express to everybody on this call. If you're coming in as ICS security, or if you're an OT and you're dealing with ICS security, here's how I want hopefully you guys to approach this and to consider this. All right. When we're coming in as ICS professionals, we need to be careful. We need to give the OT team from leadership all the way down to the people that are out there working on the devices. We need to give them the white glove treatment. We need to make everybody comfortable, because as coming as security professionals, we can either bring down the process, bring down systems, or we're going to ask them to make changes to it. Okay, leadership is going to be concerned that we're going to bring down the process and take it offline. The process engineers, you know, they're going to be concerned that the changes that we tell them to do are just going to make it so hard that they're not going to be able to do their jobs. And then obviously the IT people within the OT environment, they don't want us to destroy the relationship that they have with the OT. Their relationship that they've built around with the OT team has been built up over time. It's probably had a lot of disagreements to get to a working model to actually address some things like isolation and so forth. And so information security professionals coming in, and it's very easy to backslide from those relationships if you don't approach it correctly. And so that you definitely want to use the white glove treatment when you're coming into these environments. Let them know that you're here to help. Let them know that you understand that the process is valuable, and that there are things that they're concerned about that you will help them address. Okay. When I was at the summit, when I was at the Gas and Oil Summit, I actually had a room full of information security team members that were on the OT teams that had been assigned over there. And their number one recommendation, and this has been the recommendation from all of the OT people that I've gotten to know, is they want the IT people that are coming in, they want the InfoSec people that are coming in to not come in and talk about changes, to come in and learn about the process, to learn the team members, to sit down and talk to them and walk through the process. All right, you need to spend time with the OT team so that you understand what's going on, so that you understand what their requirements are, what the responsibilities are, how they naturally do things before you start making recommendations to change things. Okay, you can't make recommendations to change things if you don't understand what they're actually trying to do, what they're actually trying to accomplish. Okay. Got another question from Caesar. Do these systems follow the RMF process? Caesar, if you can do me a favor and clarify what you mean by RMF, that would be helpful. Risk management framework. So organizations are going to have some type of risk management framework that they've probably used to evaluate the systems. Typically, the processes are designed around risk management for the process perspective. They're not necessarily didn't have requirements for information security that was built into that, and that's one of the things that you're going to see in the recommendations is that we build those requirements, security requirements, into that. Into those recommendations. So hopefully that answers your question. All right, so number one recommendation, get to know the people, get to know the process. All right, so taking all of that in consideration, how should we approach testing with these environments? And this is, this is kind of what I've come up with to help people make them comfortable. All right, it's also how people that I look to do security assessments as well. Number one thing is understand what the expected architecture is. Okay, I pulled this out of the ICS 410 class. This is our reference model. I'll let you screenshot it, but the you could screenshot it if you want, but the slides are going to be up on the SANS website. Carol's putting those up either as we speak or right after the presentation. Okay, and so this is just a representation of how processes are built and how we can build security into this. All right, there's a model called the Purdue Enterprise Reference Architecture. It's PARA. We typically refer to it as the Purdue model. Okay, and this is how processes are deployed within an organization. And as a part of that model, what we've got going forward, and this is actually outlined in the international specifications for processes, is there's different enforcement zones. So understanding what the expected architecture is and thinking about logical ways that people can move their processes to, whether they're brownfields, things that are deployed, and slowly migrating certain things over as they're doing maintenance, or whether it's greenfield and they're planning it, understanding what the expected architecture is going to go a long way to leading your approach to your assessments, okay? Because what we're gonna do is we're gonna test these enforcement zones, and we're gonna test then we're gonna test the implementations at different zones, at different levels, to understand what can go wrong with the process and how we can protect the process. All right. But considering that, what we need to understand is that there's a way that organizations that are going to approach that the prioritization of efforts. And what I'm trying to tell everybody is these are the 6 things the 6 tactical starting points. You know, building a security program around an OT environment is very complex. There's a lot of things that go into it, but when we start, a lot of the OT people that I've talked to, they're like, hey, just tell me what I need to be doing right now. Okay, and so this is how I start with, and this is how I actually outline my methodology associated with the approach for security. We talk about the prioritization of efforts. Security policies definitely are different between IT and OT environments. Then I'm concerned about segmentation and isolation, access controls. Then I want to ensure that people are logging and monitoring all of their devices, understanding what assets are out there in their inventory. If you don't know what your hardware and your software is out there, then you need to discover it. And then obviously there's incident response and recovery would be kind of the final tactical step to be ready for. Okay, these are the approaches that I use to help people understand what are some quick ways, some quick wins that you can get to securing your environments. And therefore, when I approach doing my assessments within these environments, I take this into consideration, okay? So when I walk into an organization, I'm thinking about that methodology, but I'm gonna gather information about all of that, okay? So this is actually how I start I'm actually doing my assessment at this point. The first thing I do is my process familiarization. As a part of my scoping calls for my assessments, I get all of the documentation I can, from policies to network documentation to information flow documentation, and I read it all. I usually spend anywhere between 3 and 5 days before the assessment going through different things, asking for more information. Certainly, some organizations are more comfortable with remotely sharing some of this data, but I get as much as they're willing to share, and I review that documentation so that when I go on site, I can ask logical questions and have as well of an understanding as I can with that. From there, I do site walkthroughs. Actually, once I get on site, one of the first things that I like to do, some people like to do this later, but I like to do it right off the bat, is to walk through the site, walk through the plant, okay? And what that does is that allows me to talk to all of those people that we talked about before, the process, the process engineers, the operators, the field technicians, get them to show me how they do their day-to-day jobs and actually ask them, hey, what are you concerned about? Because the biggest concern here is around safety. I want to be careful what I'm testing, but also that's kind of my priorities when I'm thinking about securing things. I want to secure the assets that they're most concerned about that would have a negative impact either on the process or even a critical impact on it. As I'm walking through, I'm doing my interviews, not only looking at the devices like control panels and seeing how things are configured, but I'm talking to people about their jobs. And I will sit down and talk to as many people as I can, the managers, engineers, IT team, IT security team, vendors and integrators. And I use that information to start my threat modeling and so forth. Threat modeling is going to help me understand the attack surface and how to prioritize what I'm going to go after if I'm thinking of attack scenarios. Then ultimately, if I have time and it's a part of the assessment, then I can go down into configuration analysis and source code analysis. That definitely takes more people and more time when you're doing your assessments. So process familiarization. I haven't touched the network at all, and now I have a huge amount of data about their network. Okay, and I could actually, from a security assessment standpoint, I can probably help improve their security from this information alone. I don't even need to touch their networks. I can actually give a full detailed report about their maturity and what they should do in order to actually prevent and decrease the risk to the process. But ultimately, there's a lot of other information that we want to gather. We do want to still get some information. They might need some help with asset identification. Asset identification is typically one of the deliverables that are on my assessments. And so if I can't scan, or if scanning potentially is going to have a negative impact on the environment, I have to have other ways of gathering the information. Okay, so the first thing that I turn to is doing network monitoring. Now we still have to have a consideration around that because number one, it's a change of the network. We might be asking people to either insert taps or configure switch ports, span ports on switches and so forth. So that's a configuration change. We need to understand if the network can handle that, if the device actually can handle that, and so forth. So we need to have skills around network monitoring, information gathering, and actually doing analysis of that to identify what's communicating on their network, do asset inventory, and then understand what the information flow is. The next passive information gathering that I like to do is what I described before, which was the running my CHAPS script, the configuration hardening assessment PowerShell script. And all of that is as I mentioned, is it's just gathering system data, dumping it to a file, and then I can go through and see what their configuration settings are. I can also take some of that information and run it against other projects that are out there, like the Windows Exploit Suggester, to take that system information, the information about the patches that they're missing within that environment, and that will help me understand what can be exploited within their environment without even me having to exploit it. And then from there, then I can do active testing. If the environment, if the team that I'm working with is comfortable with me doing some more active testing, I can do the scans that we want to talk about, or that we were talking about. I can do some information gathering, leveraging Nmap and so forth. But I would start with the master servers. I would start with the servers that are Windows systems, Linux systems that actually can handle those scans and not bring the services down. I typically won't be doing that on field devices and so forth. But these are a few points about how you can approach some of that active testing to make it safer within the environment. But you have to know your tools. You have to know the impact that they're having on the tools before you actually do those tests. You should be testing those tools within your own environment, understanding how to rate limit and so forth beforehand. And if you're going into an organization that is very concerned about this, doing this within one of their test environments before you're doing this within their production environment. So in conclusion, and we've got about a minute left, all right? But in conclusion, our goal as information security professionals going into an OT environment is to have a controlled migration to a mature OT environment. In other words, on the left-hand side here, we can see the image. This is the one we started. This is the worst case scenario. And you're gonna, unfortunately, you may find an organization that is actually that bad. Typically, the organizations that I go into, they're a little bit more mature than that, but they're certainly not as mature as we see on the right-hand side, which is an environment that is following that Purdue model, okay, that has different levels and different subnets and zones that are associated with the roles and responsibilities for not only the process, but the management servers and all of the other devices. They go through they're connected, each different layer. The corporate environment is connected to the control environment through several enforcement zones that provide remote connectivity as well as information flow securely from the control environment to the business environment, because that data doesn't need to go out there. So our goal as information security professionals is to move people from that less secure state to a more mature state, having the least impact on the control network as possible. So what that means is ICS, or as information security professionals, we need to change our mentality and our approach, okay? This quote actually comes from a survey that was put out last year, 2019 ICS survey associated with cybersecurity. Okay, your biggest challenge with integrating will be changing the mindset of both IT and OT to think like each other and leverage each other's expertise. I couldn't have said it better myself, and that's why I put it in here, is because we need to come together. We need to stop building up the walls. We need to understand this environment is different than the IT environment. IT, information security professionals, we need to do things like we need to slow our roll and check our attitude. You know, we can't do the things we did in a business environment within the OT environment. OT environments can't live up to the IT policies. We just need to understand that. Best practices, while they're nice to have within the OT environments, while we want to leverage those to make good decisions, we just need to understand that we're not going to be able to do all of those things. And then, of course, you know, we're here to help. We can help the environment. We can do a lot of our information gathering and a lot of our recommendations just through architecture review, and then slowly progress our intrusive nature of our penetration testing and so forth, only when the organization is ready for it, only when it's needed. Okay. I appreciate everybody coming out and listening to this talk. We're right at the limit, I believe. And I'm going to check to see if we have any more questions. So I do have a couple questions. Does an attacker really care if his or her scans can bring down the system? That's a typical, and that kind of goes back to what I talked about on the conclusion slides. Okay. Certainly, yes, an attacker can bring stuff down. You know, right? We do understand that. We need to be thinking about our priorities. We need to be identifying that, and rather than actually doing it, understanding different ways to approach and protect against that, rather than doing that ourselves as an assessor. Okay, what type of tool? So what types of tools do you use for these environments? I use all of the normal tools that we typically use for an IT security assessment. There are tools that are specifically designed for these types of environments. A lot of times what I'll find is that organizations are more comfortable leveraging the tools from their vendors. So if you're so rather than doing a scan with Nmap to go out and discover things, maybe leveraging one of their tools on their asset management systems, making sure it's configured correctly to go out and query devices, they'll be more comfortable with that, and so you can leverage those tools. But there's no one set tool that is widely accepted within these environments. It's more of the people that are using and them understanding how to leverage those tools safely within these environments. Okay, and then I'm going to take this as the last question. What about NERC SIP? Should we read the standards to help understand OT roles? Absolutely. If you're going to help an organization that is responsible for doing certification and associated with NERC SIP, then understanding what they should and shouldn't be doing, from a roles aspect, and also from an implementation standpoint, you should have that understanding before going into that environment to help them assist with that assessment. SANS actually has a course, I think it's 456 or 7, that is associated with the NERC SIP and doing assessments for that, and that's a part of the ICS program. So understanding the requirements that you need within that environment before going into it to help drive your assessment is very important. Okay. I apologize, I can't go down every single one of these. Oh, it's ICS 456. Thank you, Michael, for putting that out. I appreciate everybody for coming out. This is SANS at Mike's talk. I rushed a little bit at the end. The slides are going to be up on the SANS website. Carol will be putting those up shortly. But other than that, thank you very much for spending the evening with me. Hopefully it was enjoyable. Please reach out anytime. I'll put it up there one more time. You can contact me on LinkedIn, through Twitter, or email me directly. More than happy to answer anybody's questions. And I hope to see all of you at a live event in the near future. So thank you very much for your time. Hopefully you had a good time, and have a great evening. Stay safe, everybody.